Before Titanic ever met the iceberg, disaster was already quietly at work. The new three-dimensional mapping reveals overlooked vulnerabilities, like a coal fire burning for days inside her hull, and millions of hand-driven rivets placed under production pressure. These were not just background details. They stacked the odds against everyone on board. If Titanic's fate was sealed long before impact, what hidden chain of human choices truly set the tragedy in motion? Deep within Titanic's hull, as passengers settled into their cabins and the ship steamed toward New York, a fire smoldered in one of her coal bunkers. This was not rare for steamships of the era, but the fire in bunker number 6 refused to go out. Stokers discovered it soon after leaving Southampton, and for shifts they worked in shifts, shoveling burning coal out of the bunker and feeding it into the boilers. The heat inside that steel chamber soared, with estimates reaching between 500 and 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to make steel lose much of its strength if exposed for long enough. Don Lynch, Titanic historian, describes these fires as a dirty, secret yet of transatlantic travel. Ship owners rarely advertised them, and crews were expected to handle the problem quietly. But Titanic's fire was stubborn. Survivor accounts from firemen like Frederick Barrett suggest the blaze burned for almost 10 days, right up until the night before the collision. Under pressure to keep the ship on schedule, stokers moved the hottest coal to the furnaces as fast as possible, hoping to starve the fire of fuel. The job was grueling and dangerous. Paint peeled from the bulkhead. Some said the steel glowed red. Metallurgists point out that steel exposed to such heat can lose up to half its ductility. That means it bends and stretches less before snapping, especially if it is suddenly chilled by freezing seawater. The bulkhead separating Boiler Room 6 from the rest of the ship stood right next to the burning coal. If that steel was weakened, even slightly, it might not hold back floodwaters as designed. And in the chaos after the iceberg strike, every second and every barrier mattered. Official inquiries later heard testimony about the fire, but its impact was debated. Some experts argued the affected bulkhead held up as intended for a while. Others wondered if heat damage made the difference between survival and disaster for the forward compartments. The three-dimensional scans of the wreck now show subtle deformations and patterns of collapse near the site of the old fire, fueling new questions about how much unseen damage was already at work before Titanic ever saw the iceberg. What is clear is that the fire was never truly extinguished. It was managed, contained, and kept out of the headlines. But the cost of that secrecy may have been paid in steel that was less able to resist the sudden shock of cold Atlantic water. Long before the collision, a chain of decisions and hidden risks was already taking shape deep below decks, setting the stage for what would happen next. Titanic's construction demanded a scale and speed that pushed the limits of early 20th century shipbuilding. Harland and Wolff's Belfast yard hammered together nearly 3 million rivets to hold the ship's steel plates in place, a number almost impossible to picture. These rivets acted as the ship's connective tissue, binding hull plates along the spine and curves from keel to deck. But not all rivets were created equal. On the long, straight stretches of the hull, hydraulic machines drove steel rivets with immense force, producing a consistent, reliable bond. In the bow and stern, where curves and tight angles made machines useless, Teams of men worked by hand, heating wrought iron rivets until they glowed, then hammering them home with sledge and muscle. Hand riveting was a craft passed down through generations, but it depended on the skill of each team and the quality of the materials at hand. Wrought iron was chosen for these tricky areas because it was softer and easier to shape, especially when working in awkward positions. But wrought iron, especially when produced quickly to meet tight deadlines, could contain more slag, glassy impurities left over from the smelting process. Too much slag, and the rivet could become brittle, especially in cold conditions. One bad batch, one rushed shift, and a seam could be left with a hidden weakness. The pressure to deliver Titanic on schedule was intense. The White Star Line's new flagship was already behind her sister Olympic, and every day of delay cost money and prestige. Records from the yard show that work was sometimes doubled up, with teams laboring day and night. Inspectors checked the work, but human error was inevitable at this scale. In the ship's most complex curves, along the bow, stern, and upper decks, hand-driven rivets went in by the thousands, each one a potential point of failure if the iron wasn't right or the hammering uneven. When the hull met the iceberg, these seams took the brunt of the impact. Later analysis of the wreck and recovered fragments revealed that some of these hand-driven rivets had higher slag content than ideal, making them more likely to snap or pop under sudden stress. In straight sections, the stronger machine-set steel rivets held firm, but along the curves where the collision force was greatest, the weaker hand-driven iron fasteners may have given way first, opening seams and letting seawater rush in at a rate no one had anticipated. Titanic's hull was a marvel of engineering, but the realities of mass production and the push to launch on time planted seeds of vulnerability deep within her structure. Every rivet was a small gamble, and in the cold Atlantic, it was the weakest that decided the outcome. April 14th, 1912. Titanic's wireless room pulsed with a flood of messages. 6 separate ice warnings arrived throughout the day, each one charting the path of drifting bergs and thick pack ice ahead. At 9 in the morning, the Coronia reported ice directly in Titanic's path. By early afternoon, the Baltic confirmed heavy ice fields, and the Californian reported 3 large bergs. Still, Titanic pressed on at over 21 knots, nearly her maximum speed, intent on keeping to schedule. The bridge posted some warnings, but the ship's course and pace never wavered. Captain Edward Smith, respected for decades at sea, had steered White Star liners through these waters before. In the era's thinking, a modern ship could outpace danger, and a warning was just that. A note, not an order to slow down. The North Atlantic in April was notorious for ice, but the pressure to arrive on time was just as real. As evening fell, the wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride found themselves overwhelmed. Titanic's Marconi set crackled with messages, not just from ships, but from passengers eager to send telegrams home. The backlog grew. At 7:30 in the evening, the Mesaba sent a critical warning. A dense field of ice lay dead ahead, stretching across Titanic's route. But the message was never marked as urgent and did not reach the bridge. Instead, it sat among a pile of routine communications, lost in the noise of the world's most luxurious ship at sea. By 9:05 in the evening, another warning arrived from the Rappahannock, describing ice directly ahead Again, the ship surged forward, engines churning out nearly 22 knots. The belief in Titanic's invincibility and the confidence in her design left little room for hesitation. Every hour shaved from the crossing was a victory for White Star Line, a point of pride for passengers, and a mark of progress for the age. With each missed warning and every mile covered at speed, the margin for error shrank. The sea ahead was dark and moonless, the lookout's binoculars missing, and the cold air biting. The iceberg was not the only threat that night. It was the shrinking window to react. A window narrowed by a relentless schedule and the assumption that nothing could truly threaten the world's greatest ship. Titanic's lifeboat deck, gleaming and orderly at departure, hid a fatal equation. The ship carried 20 lifeboats, with seats for 1,178 people. Yet on her maiden voyage, there were about 2,224 souls on board, from first class to steerage, crew to stoker. Even if every lifeboat launched full, over 1,000 would have been left behind. The numbers were not a secret. They were written into the ship's plans, approved by the British Board of Trade. Regulations at the time did not require lifeboats for every passenger, just enough for a ship of Titanic's tonnage, not her capacity. The rules, last updated when ships were half her size, set the minimum at 16 boats. Titanic carried 4 extra, but the gap remained. On the night of the disaster, this shortfall turned deadly. As the ship's fate became clear, officers and crew rushed to ready the boat. Confusion reigned. Many believed Titanic could stay afloat long enough for help to arrive. Some passengers hesitated to board, unwilling to leave the apparent safety and warmth of the ship for a tiny wooden craft in the freezing dark. Officers followed the women and children order, but without clear drills or practice. The process broke down. Lifeboat number 7, the first launched, left with just 28 people aboard. There was room for 65. Others went out half empty, some carrying as few as 12 or 20, despite the desperate crowd gathering on deck. By the time the last boats were lowered, hundreds still waited. Collapsible boats, meant as a final option, were rushed over the side as the bow slipped under. In all, only about 705 people survived the sinking. Over 1,500 perished, most never given a chance to escape. The math had been settled before Titanic ever saw the iceberg. Her lifeboats could not have saved everyone, even if every seat was filled. The gap between regulation and reality became a death sentence, written into the blueprints and signed off by officials who never imagined a ship of this size could founder so quickly. Titanic's legacy would force the world to rewrite those rules, but for her passengers, the cost of that lesson was paid in lives. On September 1st, 1985, a team led by Robert Ballard from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution tracked a trail of debris across the North Atlantic seabed. For days, the search had yielded nothing but darkness and scattered echoes. Then a shape loomed out of the gloom, a massive boiler, unmistakable and out of place. The debris field stretched for hundreds of yards, littered with coal, crockery, and twisted metal. Following the trail, Ballard's cameras finally revealed the bow of Titanic, upright but battered, lying over 12,000 feet below the surface. The stern was found nearly 2,000 feet away, ripped apart and collapsed into itself, confirming for the first time that the ship had broken in two before settling on the ocean floor. This discovery transformed Titanic from legend into a crime scene frozen in time. The separation of bow and stern, the scattered debris, and the damage patterns told a story that did not match the old tales of a single clean break or a ship sinking in one piece. Instead, the evidence pointed to a violent, chaotic end that demanded a new kind of investigation. Forensic questions multiplied. How did the breakup occur? What sequence of failures allowed so much water to flood in so quickly? What could be learned from the way the wreck lay, from the shape of the torn steel and the objects resting in the silt? If the iceberg wasn't the real killer, what actually doomed Titanic before she even left port? The answer lies in a chain of preventable choices and hidden vulnerabilities. Rivets with too much slag, brittle in the cold. Steel heated and stressed by a stubborn coal fire, then shocked by freezing seawater. A ship driven at high speed through a known ice field, with warnings ignored or delayed. Lifeboats too few for the people aboard, and confusion when every second counted. The wreck, mapped and measured, reveals that Titanic was compromised long before the iceberg appeared. The disaster was not a single twist of fate, but the result of decisions made in shipyards, boardrooms, and on the bridge, each one leaving a mark that would only be visible decades later on the rusting bones of a lost ship. The most detailed look at Titanic's fate comes not from faded blueprints or survivor stories, but from a digital twin built out of 715,000 photographs. In the summer of 2022, engineers from Magellan and Atlantic Productions spent weeks in the North Atlantic, guiding submersibles through darkness and current, capturing every angle of the wreck and its debris field. The result is a digital twin so precise it records not just the sweep of twisted decks, but the outline of individual rivet heads along the hull. The dataset, 16 terabytes in total, lets researchers examine the ship as if the ocean had been drained away, exposing scars that no diver's light ever could. This model makes one thing clear: Titanic did not suffer a single dramatic gash. Instead, along the starboard bow, the scan reveals a line of separated seams and missing rivets. Plates have peeled back in discrete patches, not one long wound. Here, the digital twin matches what metallurgists like Tim Folk found in the lab. When Folk examined recovered rivets, he discovered slag levels over 9%, far higher than modern standards. Slag, a glassy byproduct of smelting, makes wrought iron easier to shape, but turns it brittle when cold. In the freezing Atlantic, that brittleness became a fatal flaw. Under the stress of the collision, rivet heads popped or sheared off, letting the steel plates spring apart. The three-dimensional model traces this chain of failure, rivet by rivet, seam by seam, across the bow's battered surface. No earlier expedition could capture this level of detail. The digital twin resolves differences between machine-set steel rivets and the hand-driven wrought iron fasteners used in the bow. In the areas where the iceberg struck, the weaker, high slag rivets failed first. Rather than a catastrophic tear, the hull opened gradually, water flooding in through a series of small but deadly separations. Forensic mapping now confirms what was once only theory. The disaster unfolded not in a single moment, but through a cascade of preventable weaknesses, each one leaving its mark in rust and shadow. The urgency is real. Bacteria are eating through the wreck, and experts warn that much of Titanic's evidence could vanish by 2030. But for now, the digital twin preserves the truth in forensic clarity, a record of how brittle metal, rushed choices, and a relentless schedule turned a legend into a cautionary tale. Today, the Titanic's digital twin isn't just a window into the past, it's a warning for the future. As new ships push speed and luxury, the evidence beneath the Atlantic proves that overlooked flaws and ignored risks rarely stay buried. Technology can now reveal every missed chance, but only vigilance can prevent history from repeating. The ocean, after all, keeps perfect records. Share your thoughts below.